Hello, my name is Cathy and I live in Great Yarmouth. My channel Jack's Fan failed to upload my video, so I created this new channel. I've got some pictures and slides to show you. You don't have to follow the words. I'm going to read the words out anyway, that's just there to keep me on track. I haven't made a video for nearly a year, but what a year it's been. Less than 48 hours after posting my last video, my house caught fire. Nobody was hurt, but it did take the whole roof off and it ripped through the whole house. And I still haven't been able to return home yet. We're living in alternative accommodation at the moment. The house did reveal a number of things that are really interesting, but that's not actually why I'm making this video, and that's exactly why I've had to put little notes on each slide so that I don't go off diverting onto another subject. Forensics employed by my insurance company blamed the fire on an electrical fault, and there's an irony in that because for 3 months prior to the fire I had been researching electricity. It's amazing how quick a building can be stripped back as well, and that's also something that I'd been looking into, because when we're looking at all these historic buildings, we're looking at what they look like now, but that doesn't tell us very much about what they were. And the speed at which a property can be stripped back, as I've discovered with my house, is quite amazing, because in what you're looking at there were walls, the stud partition walls, there was a bathroom, there was a shower, there was a hallway, there were 2 bedrooms. I know it doesn't look like that's feasible because it's even when I go in there I can't believe that all of that was in that space, but it just goes to show that if you were just presented with this building as it is now, one, you'd think it was a lot older than it actually is. Fair enough, it's said to be an 1800s build, but when I was living in it, it didn't look that way. It was just a point to make that it can be very deceiving, and it's very difficult to imagine something that you've never seen. So although I haven't posted any videos, I have never stopped researching. It is a massive hobby of mine. I research a number of subjects and I do have help. My help comes in the form mainly of Sandy123, who's always looking at different things on electricity and radiation and so on, different buildings, and then sending links over to me so that I can further investigate. It was Sandy who come up with the idea of naming the project Obsidian Alice, and I've just got so much information now that it's been really hard for me to work out where to even start. So rather than try to tell you everything all in one video, which would go on and on and on, it's probably better to look at the basic underlying premise of what I think these buildings actually were. So today, if we're going to build anything at all, there tends to be an idea of what the purpose is. So there's a reason, for instance, why we would put these pipes in this particular pattern. It's not there just to look pretty, and obviously these chimneys aren't there for decoration. Every aspect of it has a purpose. Now it's fair to say that you might want a building to look as glamorous as possible, but at the same time it has to be fit for purpose. So my question is, with regard to churches like this one over here, what were they thinking that the purpose was going to be? Because for people to gather together to worship, did it really need to have the vaulted ceilings? Did it need to have all of those windows? What was the requirement or the thought behind putting up spires? So all of these things, they don't really have a religious basis. You could perhaps say, well, the cross is there because it represents Jesus. But where you're going to go with, and the organs are there because what? And the vaulted ceilings are because what? You get the gist of what I'm saying. Whereas if you look at these two hydro plants, these are for hydroelectricity, there is a reason why this is a bank of wells. There is a reason why you've got all of the windows, because you need as much light coming in as possible. It's practical to have all of the windows in there. You know, so even the you know, the dip in this, there's a reason for it, you know, for the equipment that they want there. So it's been built with a purpose in mind, and my thoughts are that if you stripped this out, you could quite quickly and easily make it look very similar to this church. This is a completely different building, obviously. You've got the Roman Pantheon here, which is obviously archaic. It was, again, a temple. But on the other side, this is a cooling tower inside a power plant. So I'm going to focus today on looking at the different kinds of buildings and structures we would have, or we do have, for generating electricity. There are so many ways, and it's not as if we've picked one way and then just stuck with that across the board. There's lots of different ways of making electric, and it involves different kinds of structures to achieve that. And of course, what I'm going to look at is all of the machinery, because if I'm saying that a lot of the buildings we're looking at potentially were generating electricity, then I need to have an idea of what happened to all of the machinery. And I want to look at whether there's the potential capability. What would they need? What kind of metals would they need? What kind of thought would they need to be on track to developing electrical plants? So producing electricity can be quite simple. This is just electrochemical, and you've got the zinc and the copper nails in there, and that's just copper wire and leading up to the light bulb. And it can be very complex. This is the control room of a nuclear power plant. I do think, having looked at electricity and how it's developed and the different ways that we get electricity, I do think that we've been taught to think about it in the wrong way. That's different to an out and out lie, but it's certainly not the truth either. So if you ask Google when was electricity invented, the first answer it will churn out is 1882, when Edison helped form Edison Electric Illuminating Company of New York. It goes on to say progress was slow, and only in 1925 did half of all the homes in the US have electric power. If you look deeper, you'll find that historians know full well that actually in 1746 there was the Leyden jar, and the Leyden jar was far and wide, any city in England, France, Germany, Holland, Italy, even America, and it was actually a friction machine. So that's rotating. That's the best way to get the friction going, and that's pretty much the method we use today. But you can go even further back, because again, archaeologists and historians know full well that the Egyptians and Greeks had known that certain fish could deliver substantial shocks to an organism. So static electricity had been discovered by the Greeks, who produced it by rubbing resin, which is amber. In Greek, the word for amber is electron, and electricity was named after the word amber. And they would rub the amber with cat's fur, or by rubbing glass with silk. For example, Thales of Maltus reported in 600 BC that a piece of amber, when vigorously rubbed with a cloth, responded with an attractive power. Light particles such as chaff, bits of papyrus and threaded jumper not threaded jumper, and thread jumped to the amber from a distance and were held to it. The production of static electricity at that time became associated with an aura. So the reason that I underlined glass with silk is you're looking at a civilization who have produced glass, and they have processed and woven silk into cloth for them to be able to rub those two things together. So those two products have to exist. If you're in that kind of environment where people are developed to that degree, it seems bizarre to me that they would realise something was going on there and then not actually progress or put any real effort into finding out more. That doesn't really sit with the mindset of people who have worked out how to create heat to such a degree that they can melt sand and create glass. As that aside, didn't everyone always know that electricity existed? I mean, did you think we would need to rub glass and silk together to realise it existed? So you've got the Baghdad battery, which is purportedly 2,000 years old. I wouldn't necessarily go along with all these dates. I'm just repeating what mainstream tell us and what the story is. I'm not saying I'm on board with all these dates that are given. But the point is they recognise, as far as they're concerned, it's 2,000 years old. Now, archaeologists haven't agreed, and you can't pin them down to agree that it was a battery that was discovered. But it has all of the necessary requirements to make a battery, so it seems highly unlikely that it would be anything other than that. So experts are not going to deny that knowledge of how to generate static electricity has existed for 2,500 years at least. Thales of Maltus, who I mentioned before, was a Greek mathematician, astronomer and philosopher. He lived during the 6th and 5th century BC in present-day Turkey, and he's known as one of the legendary 7 wise men. Now, having read more about Thales, I've discovered that nobody knows that he actually existed, because he didn't write anything himself. So all you've got is people talking about him in their work. It's very, very sceptical, very hazy, and the different things he was purported to say and do at different times don't really tally up. So I would suggest he didn't exist anyway, but nevertheless managed to become one of the 7 wise men, but I think it's a myth. So high powered voltage is quite easily generated by rotation. That's all you need. So rotation by wind, by water, whatever. If you can get a turbine to turn, then you have the basis for producing or generating electricity. And we know that they had the basis for rotation. The water wheel is 300 BC. Earlier than that probably, but that's, you know, the ones that we know about. So once you've got that, you have the means pretty much to get electric. These are power plant turbines. This is what we use today for high voltage. So the turbines, and you probably know this already, but I didn't know all the details of it until I started looking into it. And if you want to know, as I wanted to know, exactly what the components consist of, so that you can track down whether they were available in the past, then you need to know what those components are. So a large magnet is rotated by the spin of the wheel. This is the generator. So the prop shaft of that turbine would be directly linked with the magnets, and the magnets rotate, and there are coils of very thin copper wire, and they just collect the static. Now magnets don't have to be involved, because around 1663, so you see we're going back in time. I'd originally asked Google when was electricity invented. It threw up 1800s. Now we're finding Google wants to talk about the electricity of 1663. But anyway, around 1663, Otto von Guericke used a sulphur globe that could be rotated and rubbed by hand. It inspired many later machines that used rotating globes. About 1706, Francis Hauksbee designed a frictional electrical machine that enabled a glass sphere to be rotated rapidly against a woolen cloth. So, as I say, static electric, you just need the rotation, you know, or rub things together, the right substances. Now, all you do then is, once you've got the turbine spinning, it's attached, prop shaft is attached to the rotor that's in the generator. The generator spins, it creates the electrical charge. It's then just connect wires to it, and that's it. Wherever the wires go, that's where your electricity is. So just to go over it, just so you know, it really is quite that simple. This is a power plant. So in a power plant, you've got the control rods, they're uranium. They're going to create heat. That heat is going to heat water. The water is going to create steam. The steam turns the turbine. This is the shaft. It's going to turn the generator. The generator's got all the copper coils that collects the static. You've got wires attached to that, and off it goes. In this particular model, these other components here are, once the water condenses, the steam condenses, obviously it turns into water, but that's still hot water. So they take it down, and this is cold water going through in a different system to condense it quicker, and then it's going to be pumped back around so that it can be steamed again. So it's a rotational system. And here is a water wheel, and it's just really to show you the same sort of thing. You know, you have the water turning the wheel as it falls, and that's then going to turn this shaft. There's your generator, there's your electric. So we know they have water wheels. Historically, all the components existed for electricity. So is it unreasonable to suppose that electricity was generated, or is it that they did have all the components, but for thousands of years they never worked it out, despite the fact we've already been told that in ancient Greece they did know that rubbing two things together the right things together were going to create a static charge, but they didn't investigate it. So these are 1,000-year-old windmills in Iran. They're said to still work. Now, I know they look dilapidated now, but this is my point. Looking back at my house, you don't know what they looked like when they were brand new. You can't be deceived in saying, yeah, well, you know, they work, but they're not that great, because you don't know what they look like. If it's 1,000 years old, it could have looked quite different when it was new and up and running. These ones are 12th century water wheels, but a mosaic found in Syria depicts the similar, or it may even be these specific wheels, but they are dating back to AD 469. So we don't know when the first ones existed, but they've existed for an incredible amount of time, and at no point until the 1800s did they work out, how to light a light bulb with it. So was there availability of copper, because obviously that's another important component. It doesn't have to be copper, there are other metals that work, but let's just stick with this for now. So archaeologists tell us that around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, people were able to fully harness the ability to extract and work with copper. Now, copper, and indeed all metals, are found in rocks, and you might be thinking, oh, but not gold, but I would argue that point, but again, I'm trying not to be sidetracked, and trying to just stay on track with the subject. So copper is found in rocks. So it's not the simplicity of just walking along and finding copper and working out how to smelt it down and create things. You've got to get it out of the rock first. So this is how we smelt metals today. This is specifically copper. I want you to get a real good idea of how hot you need to be able to, what kind of heat you need to manifest to be able to melt those rocks down. And then you've got to refine it, because you need to get rid of some of that. You don't want all of the rock. It's not a matter of, cooking it and it turns into copper. You've got to extract the copper. And this is how we cast copper. So this is how we're told they used to smelt copper. So you've got this little handful of rocks, and you can see this guy is making his little furnace there, and he's got his charcoal, and he's trying to do it in a way that's authentic to how we're told that they used to smelt copper. Now, it took this guy an incredible amount of time, I think, at least sort of 24 hours to get it to the right heat to be able to create this. And the amount of copper he actually extracted from that was this tiny little bobble. So I think it might be worth checking out the metal artifacts of ancient Egypt, Greece, Rome and China for yourself in your own time, just to consider if that was the method they were using, how were they creating all of these objects in a single lifetime? Because it would have needed to be an industry for them to have the metals that they've got. And, we're left to believe that they've got all these huge, fantastic buildings, and they've lasted all these years, so they were well built. And despite having that ability, they're then creating little furnaces in mud to smelt metals. So this is experimental archaeology, and this is just, you know, forcing the point. Again, do go and check this out for yourself. Realistically, it's not feasible that this is what was happening. So the experimental archaeologists, they've not really been able to recreate the smelting methods, not with ending up with enough metals. In fact, in some instances, and I think it was with iron, that they were trying to reproduce iron as they did historically, and they found it was literally impossible, to a point where I've actually read an article where they're trying to say that it must be that the iron was of a different consistency then to now, and that is why they can't get it to work. That is how adamant they are that they're correct in the method. They will not budge an inch from "it was this method." They would rather say that the iron has changed, and there's no evidence that the iron consistency has changed over the years, and if it had, the evidence would be securely in the artifacts that they're finding, and that isn't the case. It isn't the case because what's wrong with their experiments is the method that they're using. Glass is particularly tricky to manufacture, and I know it feels like I'm going on and on, but I really just want to hammer the point home. You know, I want you to think in your own mind of this culture. Think of the buildings they had, go and have a look at the buildings they had, then go and have a look at how they were creating metals and glass. You see, it's not easy to reduce the impurities to create clear glass. To make sand melt, you need to heat it to roughly 1700 degrees Celsius. And this is all glassware from ancient Egypt. And if this is glassware that survived, then you can only imagine how abundant glass must have been. And this is just Egypt. You'll find glassware from all of the other ancient cultures. And although the glass survived all these thousands of years, it seems the foundries and the crucibles didn't fare so well. So if you go and look up Egyptian foundries, you'll find they're very few and far between, and the ones that are, you know, they're claiming this was a foundry, they're like little hovels. And this sort of broken stone here, and it gives you in centimetres the size of it, this is one of their crucibles. It's listed as a crucible. So the crucible broke, but the glassware survived. You know, there are limits to what you can believe. This is a crucible that we would use today. Red bricks have been around, according to archaeologists, for over 9,000 years. I totally accept that a lot of bricks previously were mud bricks, but even they have to be fired. And we're led to believe that for 8,845 years, the bricks were made individually. And this is a real task. This is real work to be able to achieve this, and it's very time consuming. It's not until 1855 that England invents the first brick making machine able to produce up to 25,000 bricks per day. But if we're being misled, then where did they cast all the building materials? So were the huge buildings really all temples and burial grounds, while they smelted in metals in tiny pots? Because I'm thinking that these buildings were industrial. This is why they're so large. That doesn't take away from other ideas of there having been a larger species of human in the past. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm just saying that one of the reasons why you got a lot of the size of the buildings is because they were manufacturing something, and if you are using heat, whether it be for smelting metals or other industries, you need to allow plenty of venting. It means that you have to have really tall buildings. You need large spaces. And doesn't it make sense to you that, particularly in countries like England, if the Romans were smelting in these little pots and so on and sort of digging foundries out in the ground, our weather would not be compatible with that kind of industry. So I'm going to now sort of narrow it down to one particular type of electricity and one particular type of building, and I'd really like your thoughts on this. So today, geothermal power plants are the most natural, cost-effective way to produce electricity. And the geothermal plant works by drilling two wells. One is for the hot water to come up, so you've got very high pressured steam coming up here. The steam goes to the turbine is forced around by the steam, and then you've got the shaft and the generator, and there's your electric. And what they're doing is they're then all of that hot steam, as it condenses, they're piping that through here to a cooling tower, and that cooling tower is then injecting cold water back underground. So Iceland have made really good use of their natural thermal resources, and not only does the steam get piped into homes for underfloor heating, but it also provides hot water without the need for any boilers in the home. So you can, again, you can go and look into this for yourself, but all of the underfloor heating is provided on tap, basically the same as the hot water. Now there's been a lot of fantastic research by other channels, Autodidactic, Wise Up, Conspiracy or Us, and also Dave Ebony, and of course Rebel Without a Pause, but that goes without saying. And a lot of them have come across the fact that there were just no indications of how they were heating places. All of these churches and these big buildings, there seems to be no heating system. But a lot of the buildings anyway, I'm proposing, were industrial buildings, and they were beautifully constructed industrial buildings, granted, but that's what their purpose was, in my opinion. But I think people's homes, they were, being given the benefit of it. So you had all this underfloor heating. Now you'll know that in a lot of historic buildings and ancient buildings, particularly Roman ones and some that are in Iran and so on, they tell you there was underfloor heating. They're telling you they were doing it with literally fires, like wood and so on. They were lighting it, and that's how they were getting it. And I disagree. It was being piped through there, through the thermal vents. And thermal waters are found in pockets all over the earth. It's not like, well, there aren't any thermal vents here or here or here or here, because you can dig down and dig deep enough and you will always find water. Whether that water is sort of pure enough to drink or not is another thing, but you will find water and moisture, you know that. Go down far enough and you will find heat. You know, you combine those two and you've got these thermal pockets. So if in a geothermal power plant, one of the really important things is pressure and maintaining the pressure. So there has to be plenty of gauges, you know, that are monitoring everything. So if the steam reduces pressure, it's an indication of a lack of water. So you need to inject more water into the pool that you're using, that you're getting the steam from. So, you know, that's if the pressure drops. So looking at, is it possible that they had pressure gauges? Because that's one of the components you would need. Well, I can't find any evidence of pressure gauges specifically, but we do know that, because, you know, we're told that the first pressure gauge, of course, was in 1849, but we've already seen evidence that that doesn't actually mean anything. In the 11th century, specifically, this clock was employed the use of mercury in its hydraulic linkages. Now, that's important because we know that mercury is used in, or was used in the old thermometers and their pressure gauges. So anyway, this is an 11th century Arabian clock, and the clock was unrivaled in its use of sophisticated complex gearing. Now, I can't find any images, but it was described by a few philosophers and scientists of their time. Astrolabes were invented by the ancient Greeks and used as astronomical clocks, and they were also used by Muslim astronomers, and that's been since the Middle Ages. So, you know, I would say they had the technology. If they wanted a pressure gauge, they'd have been able to make one. It wasn't beyond their capability. So also you've got alarms that would sound. So in Iceland, going back to Iceland, I've said about if the pressure drops, but of course things can go the other way, and if you get a lot of rain or you know, extra water gathers below, then the steam is going to increase, and then the pressure gets too high. And if you get high pressure, then you need to vent it out quite quickly. And thermal vents do tend to come in pockets, so you wouldn't necessarily have a venting system just at the power plant. You may well have venting systems and chimneys outside of that as well. And there would be an alarm, but we'll talk about alarms in ancient times in a minute. Now, the steam that's coming up from the vents, they often arrive with minerals. So treatments ensure that the minerals don't condense and cause calcification of the machinery. And they have managed to pipe a separate line for the mineraled water. So really you want the mineraled water to be the one that's cool enough circulating and going straight down underground, because you don't really want to keep that above ground. But going back to Wise Up channel, he's done so much about how things are not as old as necessarily as old as they appear to be. And could that be because they have mineralized from this kind of steam or water? Now, if something, this is Mother Shipton's cave in England. I'm sure you've all seen it and heard of it, but people put you know, different items up because the water there is so mineralized that it doesn't take long at all to calcify the outside of an item. And if it's porous and it sinks in, then it will turn it to stone a lot quicker than time would usually be able to achieve that. But it's, so you could easily end up dating something that had been there, you know, in mineralised water for long enough, you could end up dating it as being much, much older than it realistically is. The steam coming up also has radioactive properties, and that's something that I'll probably discuss in a completely different video, but I would like to mention it now. So, like all natural volcanic springs, there is an element of radiation. Everything has a degree of radiation anyway. Radiation at limited levels can be beneficial to our well-being. That's why people go far afield to sit in natural thermal springs, because particularly in Turkey and other places like it, they specialise in it because it improves a lot of skin conditions. It also relieves aches and pains, so it makes you feel well. There are radioactive isotopes below ground. Uranium is a metal found in rocks that have been affected by these underground isotopes. And obviously uranium is in rocks, and it's processed from the rocks to create the rods that are then heated to use for a reaction in power plants. In Iceland, the steam generating electric is cooled by releasing it into a bathing pool, Blue Lagoon, and people pay to go and swim there. So, and this is just the equivalent of a thermal spring. Ancient Roman baths were thermal. So, were they just using thermal springs? And more importantly, are these thermal springs that they've come across and are using, for which there isn't much evidence, or did they have a power plant and this was the water that they were piping out, just like they do in Iceland? Now, Romans built structures around geysers and thermal springs, so it's not like they didn't know they existed. Now, they're called nymphariums. Now, if you go and have a look again in your own time, if you want to just check that what I'm saying is accurate, they knew that there were such things as natural thermal springs. Now, we're told that they built round them in this way because they thought they were revered and holy and somewhere of great importance. Well, yeah, it would be of great importance if it's somewhere that you wanted to put a thermal well in to produce electricity. It would be of a lot of importance, wouldn't it? So there can also be gases that come up with the steam. So not only does that smell bad, but it can be a fire hazard. And the gases are either vented through very tall chimneys, so you get the tall, thin chimneys. They're the ones that are venting off the gases, or they're processed to provide a natural gas supply. And here we have water towers, and they're just dotted about the land. And I'm wondering if they are chimneys outside of towns that are venting off the gas. And how were wells drilled in ancient times? Because we know that they did have the wells because you're looking at the evidence. But if you think about it, there are children who we are shown in ads in Africa who have no fresh water, and we're encouraged to donate to a charity, and we've been donating to that charity for many years, decades, so that they can have fresh water. Now, if you look into that and how they get fresh water from money, it's that industrial drills a ball, and they then go and find where there is fresh water underground by using technology, and they drill down for them and they create a well, and from there they can draw up fresh water. Now, if it was so easy to dig a well and to source fresh water, and we are told that these wells were for fresh water, that's what they were dug for, and yet we don't know how they achieved it, and nobody seems to be amazed by it. They just take it for granted. Well, it's just a water well. There is no just in that sentence if all you've got is a shovel. Think about it. How do you know where the fresh water is? Think about it. And then you've got to dig it out. I'm saying that is not what these wells were for. And they did have the drilling equipment to drill the wells. I can't think of any other way. Go and look at how many ancient wells exist. Look at how elaborate they are, and tell me that there is a reason why people in Africa who have no fresh water cannot dig these wells when they could dig the wells with the same tools that the people in Africa have got access to. No matter how poor they are, they have access to a shovel if they want one. And, tell me why they're not digging wells. And it isn't because the fresh water doesn't exist there. It's because you need technology. And we know that the fresh water does exist there because charities are getting wells and they're digging them and providing the fresh water. In the 1st century BC, Hero or Heron of Alexandria, Egypt, invented a steam turbine. Its purpose is a mystery. And I just wanted to mention this because I've been trying to fathom what you would create something like this for. So you're going to put water in the bottom there, and you're going to light a fire underneath it, so you've got to keep feeding it to get it hot enough to boil this water, to create the pressure of the steam. And then when the steam goes into this, just bear in mind, these metals had to be smelted, moulded, and so on. It's not just... see, if you wanted to make one, you'd start by ordering all those parts. If I told you you need to start by mining rocks to smelt the metals, you might not be so keen to do it. So, that, the steam pressure then is very narrow tubes that are angled, and that makes this rotate. But for no obvious reason. And this is 1st century BC. There's lots of videos online that show you how it worked, and it's pretty amazing when you actually see one in action. And the problem with it is that it wouldn't be in action for very long, because as soon as this water is finished boiling, it's boiled away, and it's not refilling. So, you've got to keep stoking the fire as well. So that little bit of it tells me that something else was going on. We're also told that Hero's geometric work, Metrica, was rediscovered in 1896. So again, it's the 1800s, the 1800s, the 1800s. And this is his steam organ, a musical instrument that used a small steam-driven wheel to power a piston and force air through organ pipes, creating sounds and tweets like the sound of a flute. And this was Hero's work, the same guy that done that steam turbine. And yet, no electricity. So, water engines and pipe organs. I found this article. An important use of water engines was the operation of the bellows providing air for pipe organs, usually but not always in churches. These usually ran from the ordinary water mains, and I've put a link there of where I got that piece of information. Steam would work just as well as water mains if you just need pressured steam. And church organs were designed to be powered by steam. Gargoyles are water features, and yet they frequently appear on churches. Now, what if they were for venting warm, mineralized water? It's the bad water. It was extracting it out. You can see from this mouth it was actually a pipe, and you'll know yourself that the gargoyles are always ugly, or sinister. Ugly probably wasn't the right word. They're quite interesting, some of them, but they're all sinister. Is that because it was the bad water that they wanted to get out? And what exactly are the church towers for? What does it have to do with religion? See, this goes back to what I was saying right at the beginning. Why, do you need the tower? What expression of holy religion, where in the Bible does it suggest that it's a good idea? Where's its relationship with what we're presuming a church is? Whereas if it is what I'm saying it is, then it makes a lot more sense, because the word tow means to pull or to draw in. Tower, in a town. And it looks to me, in this particular one, and this one's in St Mary's Church in Great Yarmouth, if you want to go and have a look at it for yourself, it looks to me like there could be a pipe running up inside that tower. And that could be high pressured steam. And this, and I do think that this would have been as well where you've got all of the turbines and the generator. And the generator may even have been as far up the pipe as this, and then you've got all these bobbles. Now, coincidentally, passing above it is all these power lines, and obviously that is today. And I'm suggesting that these bobbles were for the attachment of wires, just like the wires that I showed you in the previous picture. They're power lines for power lines. And these as well, going up the side of the church, all pipes. And it's for venting. It's designed for venting. Look at the way it comes out. If you think of steam and heat, it expands. So you want an expanding opening, and you see these things in power plants. They have to take into consideration the amount of heat that they're dealing with. So, did the clocks in towers house pressure gauges? And the bell in the tower would be a perfect alarm if the steam pressure was too high. And inside you've got the holy waters to make you well. Whole well. My personal thoughts are that these were probably water fountains. That's where you get the word font. And you were probably encouraged to drink that water, and it would have been very pure water. So I think churches, although they were using geysers and thermal wells to extract high pressure steam to create electricity, I think the same building was being used for relaxation and for spiritual welfare. So you would go there, you're listening to the organ music, you're encouraged to drink from the water fountain because it's the purest of water. And maybe they did think it was holy in the sense of it's the heart of earth, it's earth's blood, isn't it, if it's coming up. And if it makes you feel well and helps ease your aches and pains, because it has a small amount of radiation in it, which would give you a bit of a kick, then that could be how we've established the idea of a church having something to do with religions. Anyway, I was going to point out as well that there's old clock towers, and they're central to most towns, and many of them have bells and vents. So I'm thinking they're the pressure release. So if you've got high pressure, you've got the bell in the actual church itself ringing, so you know to release the valves. And you'll notice the design of these. Not only have you got the little baubles on top of this one, Big Ben, but you always have these little vents. And look at this one as well. See how that's designed for venting? And this is designed for venting, and this has the same kind of design for venting. It makes sense to me. And I would say that the water towers that are containing a large amount of water, and this is like a cross-section of one with the pipework in it, they are injection wells. So, injection towers. So that if your pressure's going too low and you need to release water down, this is what you would use. You would open the valve on the water tower. That's why these ones haven't got clocks and bells. These water towers are for releasing down. So were churches built around geysers and thermal wells, with the town then being built up around the church? Because the word church doesn't even refer to a building, it means a gathering of people, and it had absolutely no religious connotations until the 1400s. Thermal vents usually come in clusters, but so do churches. So it would make sense of the fact that there are frequently a number of churches in a relatively small area, and it makes less sense to think that these were being built during an era where people are poor, and yet they're going to build these great big churches to God. They're empty, they've got no heating, they're freezing cold, but you're going to religiously go there. And you can pick which one you want to go to, because in Great Yarmouth, it's not a huge area, but we've got about 9 within walking distance. Why? Why would there be so many? Particularly, I doubt that we could fill them all now. And we supposedly had less of a population then. So it just makes more sense if it was to create electric. So what happens when thermal vents are breached or the pressure goes critical? Well, then you go, you know, there are examples all over, of mud floods. That's a typical thing that is going to happen. And it's boiling. It's boiling hot steam. It's bubbling to the surface, and you've got pockets of them coming up all over the place. And the point is as well that it doesn't necessarily blow at the point where you've got your wells. It can actually come up in other places if either the pressure gets too high, so if there's a lot of rainfall and it's filling up and nobody is there to check it, then the pressure is just going to build up and you're going to have volumes of steam. That's going to bring up mud, it's going to bring up gas, and it's going to bring up a lot of water, because obviously the steam's going to evaporate, and a lot of that water is going to be mineralized. So everything that the water's landing on will just look like it's turned to stone in no time at all. So this is one place. I was going to put a video clip in, but then I thought better of it, because I thought, no, YouTube will probably just you'd strike me for a copyright issue. So this is Java, and human error triggered a mud volcano in Java, and that was to do with drilling, and it was a gas company that was drilling, so they were actually drilling for gas, but they hit a thermal vent and it triggered a mud volcano. And it wasn't just one eruption, it started coming up in loads of pockets out of loads of different thermal vents that had until then been stable. And these are just the roofs of houses that you're looking at. They're all buried. And it's been glugging up for 10 years. Now you get periods of time, when I looked into this, that it all seems to be settling down a bit, but then it'll erupt again. It's sort of sometimes worse than others. So it's not a steady flow, not by any means. And not only have you got boiling hot water coming up, it's because it's boiling mud, and you've also got all of the gases, and some of the gases can be poisonous, aside from the fact that it stinks like rotten eggs and it is a fire hazard. And this is a blowout that actually happened at a thermal plant. You can't see the thermal plant for the mud and water and slush that ensued, but I think there were 3 main blowouts, and this was in China. There is a video, and I've put the link there. In this situation, the video isn't in English, so it's just a matter of looking at the pictures, and I think it's more about China congratulating itself on how swiftly they were able to bring it all back under control. But you get geothermal eruptions, and if a well or the area where you've got the well that's drawing up the water dries out, then you can just as easily start drawing up magma, and so you can create a volcano. So that's the kind of heat that you're potentially talking about. And of course you've got Yellowstone Park, which is very typical of geysers, and that's probably quite a good thing to go and look at. Go and look at how the geysers behave, where sometimes, you know, they're quiet, and then other times they're erupting. And of course they're always in fear that, oh, a volcano's going to erupt from out of there. But the fact is that wherever you've got thermal waters, you've got heat below it, and that's what volcanoes are. It's the heat of all the minerals. And I'll tell you, it's not burning rocks down there. Rocks are the thing that you get after the eruption, and all the stuff that it's been boiling goes cold. That's what you call a rock. Before it's a rock, it's life that's passed away. It's all the debris. It's all the animals. I mean, imagine just a year's worth of flies on Earth. Fair enough, some spiders do eat some of them, but there's an incredible amount of creatures that just die. I mean, all the squirrels, all the rabbits, or, you know, whatever you want to think of. And then there's all the trees, all the leaves, and so on. So it's just life. It's just, it degrades, and what happens is all the fluid sort of slowly sinks underground, and all the gases leach up out of it, and, you know, so you're just left with the carcass. I mean, you know, so that's what is boiling underground. It's a cycle. Anyway, I was thinking, how could they hide the turbines, shafts and generators? And I wondered if all the exhibitions that were being bandied about in the 1800s were looking for new uses for old tech. So were they trying to find ways, or were they even showcasing, look, we got this prop shaft and turbine, it's huge and it's metal, and we couldn't think, what the hell are we going to do with this? Now, on the one hand, you could melt down the metal, but if it was as extensive as I'm suggesting it was, that wouldn't be quite so easy. So what you're going to do with this, so I think what they were doing is showcasing what they had made out of the things that they'd retrieved. And I'll talk about when they retrieved them, why they retrieved them, and what they were up to. Not as a fact, but as my theory in other videos. And I come up with this because of all the parts that are being used. And this carousel at House on the Rock, Jack Streaming did a fantastic video on this. It was used in the series called American Gods, but it does actually exist, this particular carousel, and you really got to go and watch her video, and I'll try to leave a link in, well, I'll leave a link in the description. It's really worth looking at, because there's something very odd about this. And in the series American Gods, this is a clip from that series and the way it spins round, and that just makes you think of CERN, really, doesn't it? Well, it does me. And it is to do with time travel of sorts as well, that particular series. But yeah, I'm just wondering if this is a way, because all the fun fairs started arriving all at the same time all over the world in the 1800s. So is this one of the ways that they were hiding some of the machinery that used to be in these big buildings? So there's a picture of the wheels I showed you earlier, and if you consider the Ferris wheel, all of these little buckets were quite frequently on these wheels, because as they turn round, of course they tip the water out, and it makes the wheel go faster. The faster the wheel goes, the higher the voltage of the electricity. I also wondered, was Heron's steam turbine a suitable size to fit in a home? Now, the reason that I was thinking this is because I was trying to work out what that specific device was for. And if people had high pressure steam in their own homes, a device like this attached to a generator would probably provide sufficient electricity for a home. And is it possible that it was destroyed? Now, I know that these are clay pipes, but there's no reason why clay couldn't be used to devise this. And the reason that I say that clay would be fine as long as it's fired, it would be fine because these were all found in the River Thames, and they've been there all that time. I mean, they're not gone to mush, they're fine in water conditions. And if they're supposedly smoking pipes, then they're fine with heat as well, aren't they? So there's no reason why this material couldn't be used. And these are very thin for high pressure. It would work, put it that way. This device would work if you used these. And there are just so many clay pipes that are found. And going back to my old videos when I was exploring under floorboards, I have found loads of these, and what I found was the ends weren't on them, it was just the pipe bits. And the reason that the ends weren't on them, I even remember reading about this at the time because I didn't know what they were, not without their sort of bowl on it. I couldn't identify it, but the reason for that is that they break so easy. They just snap. And anyone who is someone who likes to have one because they use it for retro purposes and they're smoking their pipe, they will tell you how delicate they are. So if they were so delicate, but everybody was using them, why didn't they switch to wooden ones that were also available? Why would you use a clay pipe? And particularly around here, it was just suggested that, oh yeah, I mean, because so many areas in Great Yarmouth, these clay pipes have been found. It's a ridiculous amount. But all the fishermen smoke them. But why would you do that? Because if a fisherman is smoking a pipe, he can't put it in his pocket, it will snap. So where's he keeping it on his person when he's doing all this fishing? And if you add a pipe and it snaps and you get another one the next day and it snaps, do you not then decide, sod it, I'm going to get a wooden one? Anyway, I suppose it leads on to the question, you know, was it a natural disaster that put everything like a street, you know, the street levels have risen, or the buildings have been dug out, all the mud flood buildings? Was it a natural disaster? And I really don't think so. My opinion is it was sabotage, and I've got an idea of who might have done that. But going back to the beginning of the video, you see I had to put the tags on because I have for a year been looking into so many different avenues. Some come back with really exciting information and ideas, and others led to nothing. And while I was trying to put it all together, I should have been sort of taking more notes. What I was actually doing is discussing it with different friends and bouncing ideas backwards and forwards. And really that's why I'm making this video now. So I know it's been very long and you're probably sick and tired of hearing my voice, and if you did make it all the way to the end, fantastic, well done you. But you know, if you can give me your opinion on what you think about some of these ideas, and I think that there is sufficient evidence to say that it makes more sense than the history that we're currently given. I'm going to say goodbye for now, and I won't leave it as long next time. Thank you for watching.